Today I'm going to show how you can build marketplace subscription payments into your Bubble app. The idea here is you can let users subscribe to a merchant's product. So for example here, we're subscribing to this newsletter for $15 a month. And once they subscribe to it, they're going to be charged $15, but that payment is going to be split between the merchant, who in this case is the writer behind Benny's newsletter, and then also the platform, which in my case is just a demo app I've used called Qualified. So I'm quickly going to subscribe to this newsletter. And once that subscription goes through, what we'll see is we're brought to the newsletter article, so we now have access to it. And if we go into our Stripe dashboard, what we're going to see is a payment just went through there from Tom Hanks at testmail.com for $15, but it was split between the merchant, which again in this case is the writer behind Benny's newsletter, and also the platform. You can see here we got $3 in the platform because we're taking a 20% fee for that. So I'm going to show how you can set that all up. I'm also going to show how you can paywall certain articles. So we've just subscribed with our Tom Hanks test user to Benny's newsletter. You can now see we have access to that article. But for this other newsletter here, Rarely Boring, we can view one article because it's a free one, but we can't actually access this second one because we've paywalled it, and you need to subscribe to get access to that article. We'll go through how you can let users cancel their subscriptions. So if we go to the profile page here, you'll see they have one subscription that is active, that's Benny's newsletter, and we can click on that Manage Subscriptions button. And we brought to the Stripe billing portal where we can cancel the plan. So we click cancel there, cancel the plan. And if we go back to our app, what we should see is the status gets updated to cancelled. And if we go back to the home page, Benny's newsletter should once again be paywalled. We'll go through how you can onboard merchants, or writers in this case. And allow them to register on Stripe Connect so that they can accept payments on your platform. You'll see here we're going to be brought through the Stripe Connect onboarding process, which will allow them to accept payments on your Bubble app. Finally, I'll show how you can let merchants access their own Stripe Express dashboard. We're logged back in here as the writer behind Benny's newsletter, and when we click on this button, you can see we're brought to this Stripe Connect Express portal. This writer has made 3 subscription sales of $15 per month. So after the various Stripe fees and the currency conversion to euros, that is what they're left with. So we'll go through that as well. I built a demo app specifically for this tutorial, and I'll put a link to it in the description. Once you get to the demo app, what you'll see is you should be able to view the editor. I've made this public. So you'll be able to see all the various workflows behind what we're going to go through. Now, before we get into building any workflows, the first thing you're going to need to do is to install a plugin. So the plugin we're going to be using throughout this tutorial is the Stripe Connect Marketplace plugin. This is a plugin I've developed myself, and you can find it by clicking on the Add Plugins button and searching for Stripe Connect Marketplace. So you can see here I already have it installed, but you can click there, you can either buy it or subscribe to it. Once you have it installed, you're going to need to configure some API keys. So you can see down here, we have 3 different sets of API keys, both in development mode and in the actual live version. These are very easy to get. What you need to do is go to your Stripe dashboard. I have assumed that you have signed up for a Stripe account for this purpose. Once you have signed up for a Stripe account and you've activated Stripe Connect, you can go to the developer section of your Stripe dashboard and click on the API keys section. Your publishable key should be visible, so I'm just going to copy this, and even though I already have it in, I'll just re-put it back in to demonstrate. We'll get rid of the existing ones. So I've copied the publishable key and I'm just going to paste it into there. And then for the secret key, a very similar process. We see secret key, we're going to reveal it. I'm going to click that, paste that in there. And then this API key is very simple. All you have to do is type in the word bearer, put in a space, and then paste in the secret key once again. These are all the development API keys. Once you want to deploy your app to production mode, what you're going to need to do is to go back to your Stripe dashboard, toggle off the test mode, and repeat the process for the keys that will be shown there. I'm not going to do that now for security reasons. Now we have our API keys configured, we can go about our first workflow. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to show how you can onboard merchants to your Bubble app. So merchants are going to be the users that will be selling goods on your platform. So if we think of Airbnb, this would be people that will be renting out a property. If we think of Substack, this would be people that are writing a newsletter. The idea then is buyers will come to your app, they'll pay for a good or service your merchant produces, with you taking a cut of that payment. If you go back to our demo app, you'll see here we have pretty detailed instructions on how to onboard users. And let's take a look at the workflow associated with it. You'll see here we have our 5 steps. And if we go into the workflow associated with this, you can see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the 5th one is actually providing Stripe with the details on their onboarding portal. I'm going to recreate these steps here. I have them filled out, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to delete all these ones. And then we will do it again. The very first step, if we look at our demo, is to use the Stripe Create Express Account workflow action. So we're going to go down here, go to Plugins, Stripe Connect, Create Express Account. You'll see the first field here we have to fill out is the country field. And this is essentially a 2-digit country number that represents the country from which your merchant is going to be based in. So US there is the default. I'm actually going to change this to IE for Ireland. You do have to make sure that the country digit code lines up with the official ones that are on this website here. The next thing we're going to use is the user's email. So we'll look later at incorporating this in part of a workflow where you might use the input field to decide on a user's email address. For now, I'm just going to use this dummy one for these purposes. Payout interval represents how often the merchant is going to get paid out. So let's say the merchant makes 3 sales in a day. Are they going to get paid out the next day? Are they going to get paid out on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis? It's up to you. You can specify that. I'm going to go with monthly. So the user is going to get paid out from their Stripe Connect account once a month. And then if we do go with monthly, we have to set this monthly anchor. And this basically represents what day in the month the user is going to get paid out on. One being the first day of the month, and so on. So I'm going to say 5, which means the user is going to get paid out on the 5th day of every month. Weekly anchor isn't going to be relevant here. It's only relevant if we set that to weekly. So that's the first step in the process. If we go back to our design tab, you can see that the second step is to save the newly created account ID to the current user in the database. So what we're going to do is we are going to make changes to the current user. And we're going to say Stripe account ID equals result of step 1, Stripe account ID. So Stripe is creating a unique ID for each merchant that's registered on the platform. We're then saving it down to this user. I've also added in this seller field. I'm going to change that to a yes as well. This is just to identify the users that are sellers versus those who are customers. The next thing we want to do is create a link that the merchant can navigate to and complete their onboarding with Stripe. So you can see here we need to use the Stripe Connect Create Onboarding Link workflow action. So again, we'll go to Plugins, we'll go to Stripe Connect, and we'll go to Create Onboarding Link. And we need to fill out these 3 fields. The first field is the account field, and that's the Stripe account ID of the merchant's account, or the connected account as it's also known. What this is going to be is the Stripe account that was created in step 1 back here. The refresh URL is the URL the user is going to be redirected to if the link is expired, if it's previously been visited, or it's just invalid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the URL of the homepage here of my demo app. I'm going to put that in. And at the end of it, I'm going to put in this question mark, and I'm going to say refresh equals true. And what this is this is a page parameter, and this can be useful in taking certain actions if this does indeed happen. The return URL is very similar. It's probably the more important one because it's the URL the user is directed to if they've successfully completed the onboarding. So I'm going to paste in the exact same thing, but instead of refresh equals true, I'm going to type in return equals true. That's step 3 done. If we look at our demo app, we can see that step 4 is going to be to actually navigate to that link. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here. We're going to say navigate, open an external website, and the result of step 3, its URL. That'll be the option there. So before I test this out, I do want to point out one more thing that I have here. So you see these two workflows in green at the very start of the page. What I'm doing here is every time there's a return parameter in the page URL, and remember I put that in when we were signing the user up. You'll see here return equals true. When returns in the page URL, I'm using this API call here. It's called Stripe Connect Retrieve Account Details. I'm checking the account ID of the current user, and what I'm doing is I'm checking if their charges are enabled. This is basically a Stripe field that lets us know whether the user has successfully completed their onboarding and whether they're able to take payments via Stripe. If this is no, what I've done is I've made a change to the current user, charges enabled equals no. And if it's yes, I'm showing this pop-up and I'm saying charges enabled equals yes. So two different workflows, one when charges enabled is yes, and one when charges enabled is no. You can click in and see this in the editor if you wish. But the reason I'm doing that is I want to know if the user has successfully completed their onboarding and whether they're ready to accept payments or whether they still need to fill out some information. Anyway, let's go back to our demo app and test out that onboarding. So we'll go down to creating Stripe Connect Express accounts. We're going to create an Express account. And what you'll see is we're going to be redirected to this Stripe onboarding portal. You'll notice here the name of my app is qualified. That is an old demo app I have. So this is going to be your own app's name, whatever that may be, when you're using the plugin. I'm going to change this mobile number to, well, I can leave that as is actually. I'm going to use a test number for now. We'll continue. I'm going to use a test code. And then one thing I will say is from kind of here on in, this can be very different depending on what geographic region you're based in. If you're based in the US or Australia, you may have different requirements when signing up your merchants via Stripe Connect. And we'll continue. We have to select an industry here. I'm just going to go with software and use google.com as my website. Again, details may be different depending on what geographic region you're in. Bank account, this is obviously very important. We're on test mode here at the moment. So again, I'm going to use a test account. Click on that. And we can review our details. So we're nearly ready to go. That all looks in order. So I'm going to agree and submit. And what should happen here is we'll be redirected to that return URL that we input earlier. And you can see indeed return equals true has come up. And I'm getting this pop-up saying success, you've registered a Stripe Connect account. So that's all in line with what we wanted. Okay, so that's how you onboard users. The next thing we're going to look at is how you can create Stripe checkout sessions for subscription payments. This is effectively how you're going to take subscription payments in your marketplace. You'll see as well I have Stripe checkout sessions for one-off payments and a marketplace example kind of for one-off payments like Etsy. I've covered these in a different video. I will link to that below as well. For now, we're going to focus on subscriptions. So we can take subscription payments on our platform with a portion of that going to the merchant and then the rest of it going to our platform. There are 5 steps essentially involved in creating marketplace subscription payments. You can do this in a number of different ways. The way I think best to do it is to create a data type called subscription, which I've done here. I'm going to go back to it and you can see here there's various fields associated with it. I'm going to go into more detail on the fields when we go through our Substack example in a minute, but just to give you a high level overview, these are some of the fields where you want to collect data for the subscription data type. So if we go back to our steps here, we're then going to use this Stripe Connect create checkout session subscription action. And instead of just kind of talking about this, maybe the easiest thing is take a look at the workflow and recreate it once again. So we're going to go down here. This is the relevant workflow. So you can see here, the first thing we're doing, as I said, is creating a subscription. In this part of the demo app, I'm using a account ID from an account I've already created. In reality, you're going to do this dynamically, and I'm going to show you how to do this later, but just for this demo purpose, I'm going to use this static account value. Let's take a look at the second step in the process. Is this Stripe Connect create checkout session subscription action that we're using. So just to put it in here again, we'd go to plugins, we'd go to Stripe Connect. There is a create checkout session. That's not the one you want. You want to create checkout session subscription. Slightly different actions for checkout sessions for subscriptions versus one-off payments. we'll have quite a few fields to fill out here. You can see here we have a success URL, we have a cancel URL, and very similar to what we saw for the onboarding, we're going to use the bubble homepage of our app. So I'm going to take this again, copy that, and I'm just going to recreate all these. So we're going to put this in here. And then we want to put in 2 parameters at the end of it. The first one is the success equals true one when this is successful. So the success URL is where basically people are sent once the payment is completed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from return equals true to success equals true. And then we also want to put in an ID to represent the subscription payment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in that and I realized I forgot to put in equals true. Then we're going to put in and we're going to say subscription equals, and then we're going to say result of step 1, which is that new subscription we created, and we're going to take its unique ID. So the idea here is once the user is redirected away from the Stripe checkout page, there's going to be a reference to the subscription in the URL bar here, and we can use that to fill out the various data fields. For cancel URL, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're just going to copy this, paste it in here, and instead of success equals true, I'm just going to change that to cancelled equals true. Stripe account ID, so like I mentioned a minute ago, I'm just using a static value here. You could use a actual dynamic one, which we will later on. Plan name, this is what's going to be shown to the user on the Stripe checkout page. I'm just going to call this monthly plan. Interval, this is how often the user is going to be charged for the subscription. Is it going to be on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or a yearly basis? I'm going to go with a month here. It obviously makes sense given I've called it a monthly plan. Price in cents is going to be the value of the subscription. So importantly, you can see here we have cents in brackets, which means that if you wanted to charge $15, you'd actually charge 1,500 cents. So just be aware of that. And then the platform fee is a percentage value. I'm going to say our platform is going to take 20% of every subscription payment that is paid by a user. So for $15, we're going to take $3 of that for the platform itself. Currency, this has to be a 3-digit ISO code. It has to be a currency supported by Stripe. You can see a full list of the currencies at that link. I'm going to put in USD for now. On behalf of, I'm going to come on to that in a bit because that's quite an important field that deserves its own little explanation. And then customer ID, again, I'll come on to that later. We do not need to fill that in for now. So effectively, we recreated this step 2. We've created a subscription. We've created a checkout session subscription. I'm just going to delete this one because it's exactly the same as step 2. You can see here back on our design tab, step 3 is to save the checkout session ID to the subscription. So you can see here, I'm taking the result of step 1, which is a new subscription, and I'm just adding in this checkout session ID just to recreate that. We insert an action, and we go to data, make changes to a thing. We're going to change the subscription created in step 1, and we're going to change its checkout session ID to the result of step 2, its checkout session ID. Then we're going to open an external website, and the external website we're going to open is the result of step 2, its URL. So that's the URL we created here. We're going to open that there. And just before we test this out, there's a small error here. So that's just a legacy page that I left in, that test page over here. So we'll get rid of that. Get rid of that, and the same down here. And now we're ready to test this out. So let's go and refresh our page. Let's go down to this section here, and let's create a marketplace subscription payment. So we're going to click on that. You can see we're being redirected to the Stripe checkout page. Our plan is for $30 per month. That's the plan name that we input. And I'm just going to put in some dummy data here very quickly. And let's subscribe to the plan. So that's gone through, and what you'll see is on the home page we have those 2 parameters in there. We have the success parameter, and we also have the unique ID from the subscription, which is important. I'll come on to why that's important in a second, but let's just take a look at our Stripe dashboard for a second. And let's look at the payments tab. And you can see there, subscription created for Freddie Mercury, $30 per month. And if we go into our payments again and look at collected fees, we should see that 10% of that went to our platform. I want to go through one more thing before we move on to a more kind of tangible example. So if we go back to our homepage of our app, you'll see here that as those two page parameters have been passed through. Success equals true, and also subscription equals this number here. And this is the unique ID that's associated with that subscription. If we go into our database, go into subscriptions, that is this number here effectively. And what that's going to do is allow us to run two other workflows in the background. You'll see here I've created this when page is loaded and get subscription from page URL is not empty. So what that essentially doing is saying when there is a subscription in the page URL here, do these things below. And the two things I'm doing below here are I'm making changes to the subscription. I'm adding in the customer ID, which again is found via this API call, and I'm also adding in the currency, price, and subscription ID, all from this retrieve checkout details API call. And I'm also making some additional changes using this retrieve a subscription ID. We will go into more detail on that in a second, but I think it's worth moving on to the tangible example, which is going to be a kind of a clone of a Substack style app. This will be more useful once we see that being built out in full. So just go back to our demo app. What you can see is I've created a demo app here, which is effectively a Substack clone. Users can sign up as either writers or as readers. If you're a writer, you can create a newsletter. You can make your articles paid or you can make them free. Similarly, as a reader, you can sign up and subscribe to articles. Before getting into the workflows behind this app, I want to talk a bit about the database structure. So what I've done here is I've just kind of marked out what the various components of the database are, and particularly how it relates to paid subscriptions and articles. So we have two types of users. We have a writer, which we're going to deal with here, and we have a reader. Writers are the owners of a newsletter. So if we go into our database, you'll see here under data types that users have a data field called newsletter. And then newsletter has these four fields beneath it. That's subscriptions, articles, name, plan. We'll just take a quick look at that. You can see there are articles, which is a list of articles. So there are going to be multiple articles associated with this data field. There's a name of the newsletter, there's the owner, which is the writer behind it, and then there's also plan and subscriptions, which are probably the most relevant for us today as we look to build out our marketplace subscription payments. Subscriptions are a list of people who have subscribed to the newsletter effectively. Now they're not actually people in the sense of them being users, they are a subscription data type. So again, that's another thing I've put in the database. We'll come on to that in a second, but you can see that's another data type. So the subscriptions here is effectively a list of this data type. And then plan. So plan is basically what are the characteristics associated with the paid plan that the newsletter writer is putting out there for people to subscribe to. How much does it cost? How often they charge that cost? And what currency do they charge their readers in? Is it dollars? Is it euros? Etc. So again, if we look at the database for plan, you'll see it has those elements there. Cost, currency, frequency, and then the newsletter it's associated with. If we move on to subscriptions, so as I mentioned earlier, there's a few different fields associated with the subscription data type. You can see here there's actually 11 in total here that I'm counting. If we go into the subscription data type, you'll see them there. And these are really kind of the bare minimum ones you need to effectively manage subscriptions in your database. Quickly to go through them. So the checkout session ID is the Stripe checkout session ID that is associated with the user when they first signed up. Newsletter, pretty self-explanatory. That is the parent newsletter that subscription is associated with. And then seller account ID is the Stripe account ID of the merchant or the writer in this case. These are all going to be created by the user. You'll see here I've kind of demarked the 11 data fields into 3 different types. These ones are going to be created by the user. What I mean by that is in terms of where it comes from. If we go to our Mubstack homepage, this is where the subscription first happens. I'll go into detail in a minute how it happens, but you can see there a subscription is being created and we're making those 3 changes to the subscription. We're adding the checkout session ID, we're adding the newsletter, parent's name, and we're adding the seller account ID. The next 4 data fields get added to the subscription when the checkout session completes, and we run those workflows in the background that we talked about a while ago. So what happens here is once someone subscribes to a newsletter, they're sent to the article page. Now we can actually look at the page behind that. You'll see here, Stripe Connect create checkout session. They're sent to the article page. And if we click on the article page, this is where they're sent. And then this is very similar to the workflow we ran on the overall demo app homepage. We're getting the subscription ID from the URL, and then we're making changes. And this is the first set of changes we're making. We're adding in the customer ID, which is here. We're adding in the currency associated with the subscription, which is here. And we're adding in the price sense and the subscription ID. Again, things you can get from this retrieve checkout session details API call. What you do need to be careful of is how you actually get this subscription. So you'll see here, the thing I'm changing is a subscription, but how do I get it? Well, what I'm doing is I'm getting the subscription from the page URL, and then I'm getting the first item that has that unique ID. That's our second set of data fields that we're updating. And then the third one coming via this retrieve subscription details API call. We're getting the frequency, which is how often the user is charged, weekly, monthly, yearly, etc. The status of the subscription, whether it's active, cancelled, and all that. And then the subscription start and end dates. And again, we're changing the subscription that we created here in step 1. And we are getting it via this subscription ID, retrieve a subscription. So that's a quick overview of the database and how we're populating them. Maybe to get a bit more tangible, we're going to run through an actual example. So typically the first thing what's going to happen is someone is going to want to sign up. And let's assume they're signing up as a writer. And let's just put in some dummy data here. And then when we click this register as a writer button, a few things are going to happen. So I'm just going to go into the workflow behind that. That's register as a reader. You can see there's actually another group down here which is hidden. Register as a writer. And there's quite a few things happening here. Some of them are quite basic. Sign the user up, log the user in, create a newsletter. So again, we're creating this data type up here. We're assigning the user to it. And then the ones we really want to be concerned with are we're creating an Express account for that user. So much like we did on the index page, the home page, we're creating a new Stripe Express account for the current user. We're adding some data fields to the current user, namely their Stripe account ID, the fact that they're a seller, we're assigning them a newsletter, and then I have this writer reader field in the database under user. And what this essentially is trying to define whether the person signing up is a writer or whether they are a reader. And then we're onboarding them, much like we did for the example on the homepage. We're creating the onboarding link and we're navigating to that website. So let's go through that quickly. Register as a writer. You've already seen me onboard someone on this, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. And once we're finished that onboarding process, we're brought to this My Newsletter page, which essentially contains a lot of information on the newsletter that the writer has just created. You can see the Stripe account ID. We can check that charges have been enabled. The way I'm doing that is just by using one of those API calls. So if we go to My Newsletter and we go to Design, you'll see there that on the page load, I'm again doing that thing where when charges enabled is yes, I'm making changes to the current user, and when it's no, I'm making changes to the current user to say charges are not enabled, and I'm also showing a pop-up just to highlight that they need to complete their profile. Anyway, back to the actual page itself. We haven't created a subscription yet, so we can do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a paid plan, and we're going to say we're going to charge users monthly, and we're going to charge them $10 a month. So we're going to create a paid plan. And now when we go into our database, what we're going to see is for plan, we have this new plan that we've just created. It's associated with mortal@indiehackers.com. That's the unique ID of the Indie Hackers or Mindy Hackers newsletter. And now what we can do is we can actually create an article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an article here. I'm going to call this Top Tips for Indie Hackers. And I'll just put some placeholder text for now. we will upload an image. And I'm also going to tick this subscriber only icon here. And what this is going to do is it means that when I add the article, which I've just done, if we go into our database and we look at articles, what you'll see here is it's a subscriber only article. So just look at the workflow behind that. If we go back to workflow, and when add article is clicked, what we're doing is we're creating a new article. We're uploading the image, the title, and the body. We're saying subscriber only is yes when that icon is ticked. I'm actually using a custom state to represent this, but you can do this however you like. You can use a checkbox or whatever you want. And then we're adding this article to the parent newsletter. So again, going back to our schema, this article is going to fall under this newsletter now. And we're adding it to the list of articles overall. And then what we're going to see is, because that's now a paid article, if we log out and we go back to our home page, you'll see I have this locked. And the way I'm doing that is I'm going to Mubstack homepage. What I'm doing is I'm searching for articles where it's a subscriber only article first of all, and then I'm also putting in this condition here. And what this condition here effectively doing is we're searching for subscriptions, and we're trying to find out where subscriptions are active and when they're in the parent group's article parents newsletter. What this is effectively doing is we're saying if a user who's a reader has a subscription and that subscription is one of the subscriptions in here of the newsletter, if that count is 0, i.e. it doesn't exist, then this article is locked. But if it's more than 0, so if they are subscribed, if they do a subscription data type in here, then they can view it. Might be easier just to show how that works in practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign up as a reader this time. Register as a reader. And you'll see when I click on this, I'm not able to view it, but what I do get is this pop-up here. And what this pop-up here effectively is if we go back to the home page, when the group article is clicked, and group article is essentially just this group here, 3 things can happen. Number 1, if they're logged out, then they're just brought to the sign up page. If they're logged in and it's a subscriber only, then they are shown the paywall if they're not already subscribed. And again, the way we're doing that is we're only doing this when a subscriber only article is yes. And then if they're logged in and it's not a subscriber article, they're sent to the article itself. So if it's a free article and they're logged in, they can read it, no problem. That's actually the case for this one here. It's a free article, no lock on it. They're sent straight to it. But if it is a paid article, they're either shown the paywall if that condition again is met where, you know, there's no subscriptions for the current user that are in the newsletter subscriptions, or they're sent to the article if that count is 1. So if they are subscribed, again, we're doing the same search. We're searching for subscriptions where they're created by the current user. The newsletter associated with that subscription is the newsletter that we're clicking on, and then the status is active. If they're not a subscriber at the moment, we've just seen what happens. Let's say I want to subscribe to the Mindy Hackers newsletter. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to be presented with either the free option, which I'm already on by default and nothing happens, or I can subscribe. You might remember we charged $10 a month for the newsletter when we were setting it up. So I'm going to click on that. And what I'm using here is my create checkout session subscription workflow. So when we click on the subscribe button, we're doing the same thing we've done on the demo homepage. We're creating subscription. We're adding that subscription to the current user. We are filling in all these fields. So the success URL is essentially the article URL. And then we're taking the parent group's article's unique ID. So remember again, articles here is a kind of a child element of newsletter. So we're looking for the parent group article, its unique ID. And then we're also doing what we did last time. We're taking a subscription parameter. We're taking the subscription that's created in step 1, where again it's unique ID, and we're going to add that to the success URL. Cancel URL is just going to be the home page. Cancel equals true. Stripe account ID, this is kind of a good one to know. So Stripe account ID here is going to be the article's newsletter's owner's Stripe account ID. So if we go back to our database, this is the article, this is the newsletter, this is the owner. I think down here we have their Stripe account ID, which is down here, I should say. So that's how we get to that. Plan name, this is basically the newsletter's name. So because we call this the Mindy Hackers newsletter, when I subscribe to this in a second, I'm expecting that to be represented on the Stripe homepage. Interval is a month, and then price is going to be the cost of it multiplied by 100. Again, remember we do everything in cents. So even though I signed up 15, that's only going to charge 15 cents unless I multiply by 100. Charging a 20% platform fee in this case. And then the currency is going to be the parent group articles, parents newsletter, plans currency. So that is 3 layers. Maybe it's easier to look at it again. If we look at currency, what we'll see is currency is part of subscription, and a subscription is part of a newsletter. So we're essentially going to parent group article, the newsletter, and then a newsletter subscription, and then subscription down to currency. So it takes a few fields to kind of get to where we need to, but that's how that's decided. On behalf of, again, I'll come on to that separately in a second. And then this is a really interesting one here, customer ID, because what we would ideally like to put in here is a Stripe customer ID that's associated with the current user, the reader that is. And it's going to be really useful later for the billing portal. So we're going to come back on how you add that in a second, but let's subscribe first of all. So I'm going to subscribe for $10 a month. You can see here the names coming in, Mindy Hackers newsletter, $10 per month. I'll go through this super quickly and let's click subscribe. We're going to be brought to the article page itself. It's going to be a pretty bare article. They might be a bit disappointed, but you can see here in the URL, we have 2 things. We have the unique ID of the article, which is how we're seeing the relevant text. And then we're also once again seeing that subscription unique ID. And again, if we go to Mubstack article, what we'll see is that when the page is loaded and that subscription parameter is not empty, we're doing these things again, where we're making changes to the subscription and we're making the second step of changes to the subscription. And then finally, and this is the new one that I wanted to bring your attention to, we're also adding in the Stripe customer ID to the user. And the reason we're doing that is, let's say we subscribed and we want to cancel it. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the My Profile page and we're going to trigger this Manage Subscriptions button, which is going to bring us to the Stripe customer portal. That's where we're going to cancel it. Before we tackle that, I've just noticed the next payment date is coming in as January 1970, which is obviously not what we want or isn't correct. And if we look at our database, what's happening here is the subscription end date and the subscription start date are both coming in as 1970. So this is really annoying. I think this is actually an issue with the way Bubble handles Stripe API. I think it's actually an error and I have submitted a bug report. So hopefully by the time you see this video, you won't have to deal with that. If you do have to deal with that, we can fix it. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the plugin section of our Bubble editor and we're going to install this UNIX time converter plugin. You can see here it's useful for dealing with the Stripe integration. And at a very high level, the issue is Stripe returns UNIX dates in seconds, whereas Bubble handles it in milliseconds. So don't need to go into the full details, but what we can do is we can go back to the workflow on our Mubstack article, and you'll see here we're pulling in the start date and we're pulling in the end date. And what we can do is we can go to plugins and we can go to UNIX timestamp to date. And the UNIX timestamp is going to be get data from an external API. The API is going to be retrieve a subscription, and the path ID is going to be step 2, its subscription ID. Then we can get the start date, and we can say extract, which is right down here towards the end. The component is going to be UNIX timestamp in milliseconds. So we're getting our UNIX timestamp in milliseconds, and this is going to convert it to a date. We're going to do the same thing one more time. So we'll copy that. We'll paste it in. And instead of current period start, we're going to do current period end. And then we can make the same changes we made in step 2 in terms of subscription start and subscription end. So we'll do data, make changes to a thing. We can do step 2 subscription, current period start, subscription start equals the result of step 4, and subscription end result of step 5. Okay, so now hopefully when we reload that page, it's going to run this workflow again because it's loaded every single time. not this particular page of the previous one. If we go back, this is a bit of a kind of workaround on my end because, you know, this would only have been loaded once. I click the back button so the URL is still saved there. But anyway, if you put in that workflow, you can see the subscription has been pulled in. If we go back into our database now and we refresh it, we should see those dates being updated. You can see there, yeah, a more realistic end date of 2023. Perfect. So let's go back to where we were going to go. We're going to go to my profile, and what we're dealing with here is canceling a subscription. See, the next payment date is on the 7th of August 2023. The status is active. And if we click this manage subscriptions button, what's going to be triggered is this workflow here. We're using the Stripe Connect self-service portal workflow. We're using the current user's Stripe customer ID. This is one we've saved down in our previous workflow on the other page. And we're opening an external website. The return URL, that's the URL the user will be directed after finishing with the self-service portal. So let's do that now. Manage subscriptions. And you can see here we're brought to this nice Stripe billing portal with our own branding. We can see here we have the Mindy Hackers newsletter. We're currently being charged $10 per month. We can see our previous invoices. We can see our payment method. So a really nice thing to be able to use. Now, one thing to note is if I click cancel here, Bubble isn't currently connected to Stripe in the sense that if I click cancel here, it's not going to feed through to my database. So what I need to do is I need to trigger something to happen when I click cancel. Just for demonstration purposes, what I might do is I'll click cancel now, and I cancel the plan. And if we go back to our database, what we'll see is even if we refresh, that's still active, so it hasn't updated yet. Whereas if we go into our Stripe database and we look at payments, and we look at that most recent subscription that was created, and if we find that subscription itself, which would be down here, it has been cancelled. So there's a bit of disconnect between what Bubble is seeing and what has actually happened on Stripe. And there's two ways we can deal with it. The first way is to use webhooks. I've put together an entire tutorial on how to use webhooks. I'm going to link to that below, so you can use that way if you want it. It will involve backend workflows for which you need a premium plan, but that is one way you can do it. The way I'm going to show you here is slightly different. What I'm going to do is when the reader is returned to the Mubstack reader profile page, which happens, you know, they're going to be redirected because of this return URL. What I'm doing is I'm running this workflow here. What I'm doing is I'm making changes to a list of subscriptions. I'm changing all the current user subscriptions, so they may have multiple ones, and I'm simply using that retrieve a subscription API call using the relevant subscription to change the status and to change the cancel at period end. The cancel at period end actually isn't going to be too relevant because if we already cancelled, it's not going to be cancel at period end anyway. It's just going to be a no, so I'm going to delete that. I don't think it's as useful as I thought it was originally. But this is useful, updating the status. So what we'll do is we will go here, and we've cancelled that now. So let's return to our app. That workflow is going to run. So you can see now the status has been updated to cancelled. And if we go into our database, refresh that, we should see that the status is changed to cancelled. Okay, so now we have Bubble talking to Stripe, and that's working out fine. You might remember earlier I chatted a bit about this on behalf of parameter. So if we go back to our Mubstack homepage, and if we look at the workflow involved in signing a user up originally, what you'll see here is when we click subscribe and we use create checkout session subscription, this on behalf parameter by default is set to no. Now, what this signifies is whether the person we're transacting with is legally and officially the platform, i.e. the Bubble app, or whether it is the merchant themselves. So if we think of the writer behind the Mindy Hackers newsletter, are we transacting with Mindy Hackers or are we transacting with the Mubstack platform? If it's no, then the platform is the business of record. So for example, if we go back maybe to our profile page, and if we look at our invoices, which is another nice feature of the Stripe billing portal, we look at this one here, Mindy Hackers newsletter. We see the platform here, and if we look at the invoice, see the platform here is listed as qualified. Whereas if I go back to my app, get out of that, and I change this to yes, and refresh the app, and let's subscribe to a different newsletter this time. Let's subscribe to Benny's newsletter, $15 a month. And this is another nice feature of the Stripe customer portal. Actually, you can see because I've saved down the customer ID, I'm getting all my default settings already put in there. I don't have to go through the whole payout process again. But straight away, you can see the merchant here is not qualified. It's bennysnewsletter.com. If I subscribe to that, I should be brought to the article and the workflow should update. Then if I go to my profile page, you'll see now hopefully I'll have 2 subscriptions, one cancelled, one active. But if I go to manage, and I look at the invoice that I just paid for Benny's newsletter, and we download that, what we should see is the merchant in this case is actually going to be Benny's newsletter, whereas here it was qualified. So that's one significant thing to consider when dealing with the on behalf of parameter. And then the other thing to do with the on behalf of parameter is if you set it to no, you're really going to need to be in the same country as the platform. So if it's set to no, and I'm based in Europe and I'm transacting with a US based platform, it's not going to work. You need to set this to yes in order to get that to work. Probably better option by default, but then the flip side of it is on your receipt, it's going to be the merchant rather than the platform who is listed there in official terms. The last thing I want to go through right now is to show you how merchants can access their Stripe Express dashboard. What I'm going to do is I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log back in as one of our newsletter writers. I'll get out of that, go to our database, and we'll just run as Mortland at MindyHackers.com. Get rid of that one. And if we go to the My Newsletter page, you'll see there's a bunch of details here. I think they've had 1 or 2 transactions maybe so far. But what we can do is if we want to access their Stripe Connect Express dashboard, what we can do is we can click this button here. And if we go to My Newsletter, what's happening behind this is quite simple. We're doing one action. We're creating an Express dashboard link using the current user Stripe account ID. And then we're navigating to the URL that's created in that step. So let's take a look at that. If you're using an actual phone number, you'll need to have a proper digit code here that'll be sent to you, but I can just use 000 because we're in test mode. And you can see here, there's actually 2 subscriptions to this newsletter. So you can see here, €21.58 of total earnings. Some of it's been paid out, some of it is still pending. Actually, no, sorry. Yeah, €7 pending and 14 is on the way. So this is just a nice thing for your merchants to be able to see how much they've actually earned in terms of sales from their subscriptions. So that's it. Hope this tutorial has been useful. And if you have any questions, you can let me know in the comment section.